Hello, everyone. I thought I would review The Winter's Tale by William Shakespeare. Now, I apologize if this takes up a lot of the frame because this is the complete works of Shakespeare. I don't have an individual edition of The Winter's Tale. And this edition can be quite challenging because it doesn't have any annotations to give you any context. It's just the complete text. In that sense, it's somewhat similar to Shakespeare's First Folio. But now, The Winter's Tale was the second to last play that Shakespeare wrote on his own, the last one being The Tempest. And he wrote one after that as a collaboration called Henry VIII. It was during a performance of that play that a cannon went off. It fired at the audience. It went off in a place that it wasn't supposed to go off. And the Globe Theater burned down, and that's when Shakespeare retired, and he didn't write any plays that we know of for the last 3 years of his life. But The Winter's Tale is quite an interesting play because it is both a tragedy and a comedy. It's almost like Shakespeare couldn't make up his mind. The first three acts are very tragic, very serious, and then the second acts, I mean, the last two acts are quite light in comparison. And so it's very interesting because it's a mixture of tones. It makes the play feel somewhat uneven, but that isn't always a bad thing, as I'll explain in a minute. And now, the play is about, and I won't mention names because you can get bogged down with names, but it starts with a king and a queen, and his friend is also a king, and he's visiting from another nation. And of course, the queen is very polite and very cordial to the king from the other nation, who she considers to be a friend of the king, and she's trying to show him respect and love. But the king, her husband, starts to view him as a rival. He starts to become jealous, and he starts to suspect her of adultery. And so essentially, and there will be spoilers in this review, after the other king leaves, he puts her on trial, and he accuses her. She denies it, and it ultimately ends up the results end up being quite tragic. She can't stand the pressure of his suspicion, and that ultimately leads to her death, or supposed death, and it also leads to the death of his son as well. And so he is grief stricken by this because he eventually realizes that he made a mistake. And then now the last two acts are about, there's a time jump, and it's about how in the play, I forgot to mention this, that the king has a daughter, that the queen has a baby that he sends away to another kingdom out in the wilderness because he just doesn't want to look at it, because he thinks that the child isn't his. Well, that daughter grows up to fall in love with the king's son in the neighboring nation. And even though she's secretly a princess, but she doesn't know that. And long story short, she eventually returns to her kingdom, and she reconciles with her father. And it all climaxes at the very end when you think that her mother is dead, and a statue has been built of her. But then the statue suddenly, magically, supernaturally comes to life, and then you're left to think, was this some kind of supernatural event, or was she alive all along? Now, I tend to think that she was actually secretly alive all along, because they say the statue is older, it has aged, that it doesn't look like she did when she died, which that would point to it being her being alive the entire time, that it's not a supernatural event. But it can be interpreted in various ways. And I can imagine what this must have been like when people saw this on stage of an actor just standing there like a statue, and then suddenly they open their eyes. That must have been quite surreal. But I think that what Shakespeare was getting at in this play, and it's something quite profound if you think about it, is that this play is an attempt, I think, at optimism when some of his other plays were quite cynical in tone. I think that what Shakespeare was trying to do in this play is to say sometimes despite all of the tragedy, the thing that we want to happen does happen, that sometimes things do work out in the end. And I think that this was an exercise in Shakespeare saying, well, what if I actually did give the audience what they wanted? What if the dead aren't always dead? What if things can actually be restored? What if the mad king or the evil king can find redemption? These are things that didn't happen in Hamlet or Macbeth. That in those plays, um, the kings fell victim to their own hubris. They did not learn their lesson, and then they ultimately perished. But in this play, it says, well, what if redemption is possible? What if someone can be redeemed? And so I think that Shakespeare was experimenting with something different. He was trying to take tragedy, a tragic ending, and ultimately turn it into something beautiful. And so I think Shakespeare was experimenting with that in this play. And so in that sense, I think what he was trying to do, he was trying to combine the best of both tragedy and comedy and create an almost new genre, so to speak. Some of his later plays are called romances for that reason. And so I think A Winter's Tale is a very unique play in that sense because it can't be called entirely a tragedy or entirely a comedy. And so for that reason, I would recommend that you read it because it's unique in that sense. So this is probably the 20th Shakespeare play that I've read. I still have 17 to go. But I feel that with every Shakespeare play that I read, I learn something new and I gain a new insight into the human condition. So I would highly recommend reading The Winter's Tale.